The night drifts over Salisbury Plain with a quiet confidence, moving through the tall grass in long, steady breaths. You lie on a gentle patch of earth, feeling the coolness settle beneath your shoulders as the air folds around you in soft layers. Above, the sky eases into deep violet, framing the distant stones as calm silhouettes waiting at the edge of twilight. All around you, the landscape widens into a gentle openness, as if the plain itself is stretching its arms to welcome the quiet of evening. The long fields roll outward in soft, shadowed waves, carrying the last traces of daylight across their calm surfaces. The breeze moves with deliberate ease, weaving through the grass with the faint sound of dry silk gliding over stone, never hurried, never bold. The ancient circle rises along the horizon, each stone shaped by centuries of weather and the patient passing of countless seasons. Their edges seem slightly rounded by time, softened by the care of wind, rain, and uninterrupted nightfall. Though they stand unmoving, they give the impression of listening, attentive, steady, and entirely at rest. The silence they carry is not empty but full, layered with the quiet memory of thousands of evenings, just like this one. As the sky darkens, the world around you shifts into a slower rhythm, allowing your thoughts to settle with the same gentle weight as the coming night. The horizon glows faintly, as if the day is reluctant to let go, though it softens more with each passing breath. In this stillness, the present loosens its hold, letting the distant past drift forward with unbroken ease. The centuries fold together without force, merging like ripples meeting on a quiet pond. Little by little, the ancient world gathers around you, not with grandeur, but with the quiet familiarity of something that has always waited patiently beneath the surface of time. The stones remain steady, outlined against the dimming sky, holding their silence as naturally as the grass holds the dew. And as the night deepens, the air grows warmer, softer, as though an unseen blanket has been draped gently across the plain, inviting you to rest within its calm embrace. Here, under the widening darkness, the plain seems to slow even further, easing into a rhythm older than memory. The air drifts in gentle currents, carrying the faint scent of grass cooled by night. In this softened world, each breath becomes calmer, each moment stretches slightly longer, guiding you toward a peaceful stillness that settles deep within. Top of form, bottom of form. The first circle of Earth. 5,000 years ago, the plain was quieter still, a wide stretch of rolling grass shaped only by wind, weather, and the slow drift of seasons that knew no hurry. People moved across this landscape in gentle rhythms, carrying baskets, shaping tools, and tending small fires that glowed faintly beneath evening skies. Their settlements were clusters of timber houses arranged with simple care, each one leaning slightly into the breeze, as though listening to the soft murmur of the plain. Life here unfolded without haste, guided by daylight, shifting clouds, and the dependable turning of the year, creating a world where work and rest flowed naturally into one another. In this early age, before stone was dreamed of as a building companion, the first great circle began as earth itself, a sweeping ditch carved into the chalk, paired with a low bank that curved around it like an outline drawn for an idea still forming. The builders used antler picks and wooden tools, shaping the ground through slow, patient strokes that left pale chalk exposed beneath the grass. Nothing about the work was rushed. Each movement felt like a quiet exchange between people and land, the soil lifting away in soft layers, the ground yielding with calm acceptance. Even the tools, worn smooth by many hands, revealed a story of steady purpose rather than urgency. Children wandered nearby, carrying small stones in woven baskets, following the adults with a sense of quiet importance, as if they too belonged to the rhythm of creation. Adults shaped wooden posts that would mark early boundaries or support simple structures, shaving each length of timber until it fit comfortably beneath their palms. Smoke from evening hearths drifted skyward, joining the gentle haze of dusk and mingling with the scent of freshly disturbed earth. This combination of soil, fire, and wind settled over the plain like a familiar blanket, connecting each person to the landscape that sustained them. It was not a time of monuments rising boldly against the sky. It was a time of subtle, steady beginnings. Seasons guided everything: when to gather clay, when to build, when to rest, when to let the plain breathe untouched. Even the smallest tasks contained a sense of continuity, as though each footstep, each stroke of a tool, contributed to a tapestry woven by countless days. The laughter of children drifted across the fields, carried easily by the breeze, while adults shared quiet conversations marked by gentle humor, simple observations, and thoughtful pauses. As the circle grew, its shape became more defined, tracing a boundary that held no walls, yet created a space that felt different from the open land around it. Standing at its edge, one could feel a shift, a soft change in air, a faint sense of enclosure formed not by materials but by intention. The creators likely felt this too, though they might not have described it. They simply continued their work, adding to the outline with trust in the slow process they shared. Evenings brought a settling calm as fires flickered near the timber houses, lighting the faces of those who gathered after a day of steady labor. Shadows stretched across the ground, crossing the circle like long fingers of dusk. People rested beside small hearths, eating simple meals, the warmth of cooked grain and roasted seeds drifting into the air. The plain seemed to listen, holding the gentle activities within its wide embrace. Nights were deep and clear, filled with stars that moved across the sky in deliberate paths. The builders looked upward often, not with wonder that disrupted their thoughts, but with familiarity, as though greeting old companions who returned faithfully each evening. The stars offered quiet guidance, marking seasons and signaling the subtle shifts that shaped their lives. Beneath this vast sky, the first circle of earth seemed to settle too, becoming part of the landscape's long, unhurried breath. With each passing day, more of the ground took shape under patient hands. The ditch stretched farther, curving smoothly as workers followed its arc with steady determination. The chalk piles created mounds of pale earth beside the ditch, catching sunlight and reflecting it in soft brightness. Grass would eventually return, weaving itself over the exposed soil, blending the new form with the plain's natural texture. Life around the early circle remained simple, filled with tasks that carried both purpose and quiet pleasure. People repaired baskets, shaped flint tools, prepared food, and tended small gardens near their homes. The sound of grinding stones echoed softly through the air as grains were processed for meals. Domestic animals wandered nearby, their movements slow and familiar. Each part of daily life felt connected to the ground beneath their feet, just as the forming circle did, a shared foundation, steady and supportive. The early builders may not have imagined how long their work would endure. They lived moment to moment, season to season, trusting the land and each other. Yet their creation remained, shaped by patient hands and quiet days, forming the beginning of a monument that would witness millennia. The first circle of earth was not a finished statement, but a gentle beginning, an outline of something larger, waiting just beyond the horizon of their imagination. And as the light faded each evening, the plain returned to stillness. The circle rested beneath the stars, the timber houses dimmed, and the people drifted into sleep, held by the soft, familiar presence of a landscape that echoed their unhurried pace. 5,000 years later, the memory of these early days lingers, woven into the soil, the wind, and the gentle curve of the first circle drawn upon Salisbury Plain. Wooden circles and soft footsteps. Where the early ditch and bank once marked the first quiet outline of a gathering place, new shapes slowly appeared as wooden posts were carried in from the surrounding woodland. The trunks, stripped of branches and bark, were smoothed by gentle hands until they felt warm and familiar to the touch. People worked with a calm steadiness, placing each post upright in the soil, guiding it into place with ropes, levers, and the soft pressure of many hands, working in unison. Nothing about the process was rushed. The building rose through patient effort, woven naturally into the rhythm of days, shaped by weather, sunlight, and the slow pulse of the land. The wooden circle took form almost without ceremony, emerging from the earth like a quiet thought made visible. The arrangement was meaningful to those who built it, though its full purpose lived more in their actions than in any spoken explanation. Each post was aligned with care, forming pathways of shadow and space that shifted gently throughout the day. As workers stepped back to rest, the posts stood calmly, their pale surfaces catching the muted glow of late afternoon. Birds landed briefly on the top edges, hopping from timber to timber, as if inspecting the work with mild approval before lifting away into the open sky. Nights brought a different kind of life to the plain. Long fires were lit near the dwellings, sending warm light flickering across the ground. People gathered around these flames, seated in loose circles that echoed the wooden structure rising nearby. Their conversations moved softly, never disrupting the calm of evening. Some spoke in low voices about the day's work. Others shared small stories that drifted lazily through the air. Sparks rose upward like tiny wandering stars, disappearing as they reached the darker layers of sky. Above them, constellations traced their familiar paths, slow and purposeful, as though guiding the watcher's thoughts into gentle, unhurried patterns. The wooden posts responded to the night in their own way. When the wind touched them, they released faint creaks, long, mellow tones that blended with the rustling grass. The plain, usually wide and open, seemed to gain a kind of quiet music. These soft sounds were not disruptive. They belonged to the land as naturally as the whisper of distant hills. Children, half asleep near their families, sometimes listened to the creaking timbers with drowsy curiosity, imagining the posts speaking in calm, ancient voices. Adults, accustomed to the night's symphony, welcomed the familiar notes as a sign that the circle was settling comfortably into its new place. Daily life continued around the forming structure with the same peaceful balance it had always held. People gathered water, shaped tools, and prepared meals with practiced ease. The wooden circle became simply another part of the world they tended, a place to pass by, to pause near, to consider silently in moments of thought. None felt the need to hurry its completion. The work adapted to the pace of the seasons, shifting naturally with the length of daylight and the temperament of weather. Even tasks that required strength or coordination were approached with gentle persistence rather than intensity, for the community understood that endurance thrived best in calm hands. As more posts were added, the circle began to influence movement across the plain. Footpaths curved around it, tracing arcs in the grass. People walked with light steps, often leaving trails that blended into the land by morning. Children played between the timbers, weaving in and out of the tall wooden pillars as if the space had always invited their games. The posts cast long shadows that stretched across the ground at dusk, creating simple patterns that shifted slowly as the sun descended. These shadows seemed to anchor the structure into the plain, tying it visually to the quiet geography that surrounded it. Evening gatherings near the wooden circle grew more frequent, not because of ritual or event, but simply because the place offered a sense of comfort, a gentle boundary where sound and silence balanced easily. Sometimes people leaned against the posts while eating small meals, feeling the warmth of the timber radiate from sunlight stored throughout the day. Conversations here were unhurried, often accompanied by the rhythm of footsteps on soft earth. The circle seemed to invite listening rather than speaking, giving the night a deeper stillness that wrapped gently around every visitor. There were times when the wooden structure appeared almost alive, not in motion but in presence. During early mornings, mist drifted between the posts, forming pale ribbons that intertwined with the timbers. The air felt cool and smooth, carrying the scent of damp soil and new grass. The circle stood firm within the shifting fog, its steady lines softened into a dreamlike silhouette. People moving through the mist did so quietly, each footstep muffled, as if the land itself encouraged a calmer pace. These mornings felt timeless, as though the plain briefly lifted itself out of the usual flow of days. As months passed, the wooden posts aged gently. Rain darkened their surfaces while sunlight bleached their tops into muted tones. Their textures changed, revealing subtle lines where insects had traced narrow paths. Yet despite these shifts, the circle remained strong, offering shelter from wind, framing glimpses of sky, and marking the passage of time with patient consistency. Each post carried signs of weather and use, holding within its grain the slow accumulation of shared moments, footsteps, and seasons. In the end, what emerged on the plain was not a monument in the modern sense, but a quiet structure shaped by everyday life. It represented collaboration, continuity, and the soft footsteps of countless days. The world here remained simple: grass, timber, sky, and time, each element harmonizing with the others to create a place both grounded and gentle. The wooden circle did not command attention. Instead, it invited peaceful pause, offering the plain a new layer of calm that settled softly into the landscape, becoming part of the wide, unhurried breath of Salisbury Plain. Life beside the early circle. Life beside the early circle moved with a softness that matched the slow breath of the plain itself, unfolding in rhythms shaped by sunlight, wind, and the gentle pulse of the seasons. Villages grew nearby, small clusters of round houses with walls of packed earth and roofs of thatch that lifted slightly when the breeze wandered through. These homes held the warmth of daily fires, the aroma of drying grain, and the faint lingering scent of herbs hung from the rafters. People moved in and out of their doorways with patient ease, carrying baskets woven from willow, jars crafted from clay, and the everyday tools that quietly supported their living. Nothing hurried. Each step, each gesture felt naturally balanced against the calm landscape surrounding them. The pottery they shaped bore the marks of careful hands, its patterns simple, flowing, and grounded in the world they knew. Spirals suggested river currents. Straight lines reflected paths across the grass. Small grooves traced the movement of fingers pressing steadily into damp clay. When the pots dried in the sun, they warmed slowly, becoming part of the quiet rhythm of the day. Flint tools were chipped beside the fire, their edges forming under steady blows from antler hammers. The people crafting them spoke softly, if at all, letting the click of flint carry the conversation with its gentle, regular notes. Children often watched the process in fascination, their eyes following each flake as it fell onto the ground like tiny shards of pale light. Small herds grazed near the villages, sheep with thick coats, cattle that moved with unhurried confidence, and goats that picked their way across the uneven ground with nimble assurance. Their bells, carved from bone or shaped from wood, created soft tones that drifted across the plain like distant echoes. Tending the animals was not a chore, but a familiar rhythm, as natural as breathing. People guided them to fresh patches of grass, checked their hooves, and gathered milk in smooth wooden bowls. Even the animals seemed shaped by the quietness of the landscape. They walked calmly, rested easily, and responded to voices spoken in warm, gentle tones. Meals were often shared in the open air, where smoke rose lightly from small hearths and drifted toward the sky in thin, relaxed spirals. Grains were ground between stones until they formed coarse flour, then mixed with water and cooked on flat slabs warmed by the fire. Berries gathered from the hedges added small bursts of color to otherwise simple dishes. Laughter flowed easily during these times, but it never broke the calm. It moved like a soft fabric, wrapping itself around the evening atmosphere. People ate slowly, watching the long shadows stretch across the plain, their eyes drifting often to the early circle standing a short distance away. The circle itself became part of their world, the way a steady old tree becomes part of a home, familiar, dependable, quietly present through every season. Children played around its edges, weaving between the earthworks and running along the gentle curves. Adults leaned against its banks during breaks from work, letting their backs rest against the cool chalk beneath the grass. Travelers passed by and paused to observe its shape, though they did so with an unspoken respect, sensing perhaps that it belonged deeply to the land and to the people who lived nearby. The circle did not dominate the plain. It simply existed in peaceful partnership with everything around it. Evenings were slow and golden, the sunlight stretching across the grass in wide, mellow bands. Smoke from hearths drifted upward, becoming almost invisible as it blended with the warm air. Women sat near their doorways, weaving baskets, their fingers moving with a rhythm learned from years of quiet practice. Men repaired tools or shaped new timber posts, smoothing each piece with careful strokes. Children played with carved wooden figures, guiding them through small scenes imagined from the day's adventures. The soundscape held nothing abrupt, just wind, distant calls from animals settling for the night, and the soft rustle of grass brushing against bare legs as people moved through it. Mornings carried a pale freshness, the air cool and close to the skin. Dew formed small jewels on the grass, catching the early light before disappearing into the warmth of the rising sun. People stepped from their houses with slow breaths, stretching gently as the day began. The plain felt wide and open at this hour, its stillness holding a kind of promise. Birds hopped along the rooftops, shaking moisture from their feathers, while the first smoke of breakfast fires curled upward in thin lines. The early circle watched silently, its form softened by the morning light, until it appeared almost part of the mist itself. As the seasons turned, the community adapted gracefully. In spring, new shoots pushed through the earth, bringing a gentle brightness to the fields. People welcomed lambs and calves, their small sounds joining the soft chorus of the plain. Summer brought warmth that lingered well into the evenings, creating long days filled with steady work and unhurried enjoyment. Autumn arrived with shades of amber and russet, the grasses shifting colors beneath the low sun, while stores of grain were packed into jars. Winter moved quietly, its chilled air encouraging fires to burn longer, casting warm glows within the roundhouses, while people gathered close, telling soft stories to pass the early nights. Throughout all of this, the early circle remained constant, marking time without marking urgency. It held the memory of the land's earliest builders and offered a calm anchor to the generations that followed. People passed by it daily, sometimes without noticing, sometimes pausing for a moment of quiet reflection. The circle did not ask for attention, it simply offered presence. To those who lived nearby, it represented steadiness, a gentle reminder that life moved not in sudden leaps, but in slow, patient arcs shaped by countless ordinary days. And always, through every sunrise and every shifting season, the early circle watched the plain with the same quiet patience. Its form caught the low light of evening, held the soft blue of morning, and settled into the muted grays of winter with equal ease. It was neither a monument nor a mystery. It was a companion, standing close to the villages that grew around it. Its presence was felt more than spoken of, understood more than explained. And through the passing of time, it became woven into the story of the land, steady and unhurried, guiding life with its calm and constant gaze. Arrival of the Sarsen stones. Generations passed, and the plain began to witness a new chapter in its long and unhurried life, as the great Sarsen stones slowly entered the story. These enormous sandstone blocks rested far from the circle's heart, scattered across the land like quiet giants sleeping in the grass. People of that later age approached them with the same gentle rhythm that guided all their days, studying their shapes, tracing their rough surfaces, and imagining how they might stand within the growing circle. There was no single moment of decision, no sudden burst of ambition, only a gradual agreement, forming softly within the community that the stones should move closer to the place where earlier earthworks and wooden posts had long been keeping watch over the seasons. Moving the stones was not a task reserved for a chosen few. It was a shared journey woven into the life of the village. When the first stone was coaxed into motion, it did not feel like the beginning of a grand construction, but simply another day with slightly heavier work. People gathered around it, rolling logs toward its base, arranging ropes made from twisted fibers and placing wooden wedges beneath edges that needed lifting. The stone itself gave no resistance beyond its quiet weight, allowing the people to learn its temperament as they eased it onto the waiting logs. When the first shift occurred, a small, deliberate slide, the sound was not dramatic. It was a deep, slow whisper of stone against wood, a soft beginning to a long and steady journey. Once the stone rested fully on the logs, the procession began. The village did not rush. Children walked ahead, brushing aside loose branches. Adults placed themselves at the ropes, pulling gently in rhythm with one another, their feet pressing softly into the earth. The logs rolled beneath the stone in an almost soothing cadence, a creak, a shift, a low thud as each log reached the end of its path and was patiently carried back to the front again. Voices murmured in quiet encouragement, but words were rarely necessary. The simple sounds of movement, rope fibers stretching, logs settling, footsteps moving in unison, formed their own calm conversation, spoken across the length of the plain. The weather guided their pace more than any human plan. When the sky warmed and light breezes flowed, the work continued with easy breaths and unhurried steps. When clouds drifted low or the wind stiffened along the grasses, people paused without hesitation, letting the stone rest while they did the same. They gathered in shaded spots, shared food that tasted of grain and wild herbs, and told soft stories about the days before the stones had begun their journey. Laughter came in small ripples, never disrupting the calm, just blending into the gentle hum of work shared among many hands. The stone, patient by nature, waited where it stood until the village was ready to move again. Breaks became part of the process, rather than interruptions. People understood deeply, without urgency, without frustration, that the stone was heavy, the day was long, and life was wider than any single effort. During these pauses, some villagers retied knots, checked the logs for cracks, or smoothed the ground ahead with simple tools of wood and antler. Others sat quietly beside the stone, resting their backs against its cool surface, feeling the ancient solidity press lightly through their skin. Children traced patterns in the dust, mimicking the swirls they had seen carved on pottery at home. Elders spoke of earlier circles, of wooden posts now long gone, and of seasons that had shaped the land into the place they knew. As the days moved on, the stone traveled slowly across the plain, guided by the steady rhythm of communal work. It was not pushed forward by ambition, but carried gently by the patience of a people who understood that every journey unfolds in its own time. The landscape shifted gradually around them. Tall grasses brushed their legs, streams offered cool water for refreshment, and distant hills rose and fell on the horizon like slow breaths of the earth. The stone followed these natural contours, as if learning the land it would one day become part of, its path curving and stretching in ways dictated by the plain rather than human intent. When the stone finally approached the area of the early circle, the village gathered around it with a quiet sense of companionship rather than triumph. The people did not cheer or claim victory. Instead, they let their hands fall gently from the ropes, listening to the low settling sound as the stone came to rest on the ground. There was a calm pride in the air, soft and unspoken, woven into the peaceful way everyone exhaled at once. The great block now lay near the earthworks of their ancestors, ready for the next stage of shaping and placement, though that too would unfold slowly across many seasons. The stone waited there as the community resumed its familiar routines. Days of tending fields, mending tools, caring for animals, and gathering herbs returned with their usual ease. Whenever people passed near the stone, they touched its surface lightly or sat beside it for a brief moment of shade. Children climbed gently onto its lower edges, sliding down its sloped side with quiet delight. The stone, steady and unchanging, became part of village life long before it ever stood upright. It absorbed the warmth of the sun, the coolness of evening, the scent of fires drifting over from the houses, and the comfortable nearness of human footsteps. And so the arrival of the Sarsen stones unfolded not as a single event, but as a long, gentle chapter in the story of the plain. Each stone that followed traced a similar path, drawn forward by hands that worked in harmony with the land's pace. In time, more stones would gather, forming shapes that aligned with sunlight and shadow. But at this stage, their journey remained simple. Logs rolling, ropes pulling, voices murmuring, breaks taken without haste, and the steady knowledge that the stones would one day find their place. The land accepted them gradually, the people guided them patiently, and the plain continued to breathe around them in its timeless, unhurried way. Raising the walls of stone. When the great stones finally reached the circle, they rested for a time on the quiet plain, settled into the earth as though gathering strength for what would come next. The people who had brought them across the landscape moved around them with gentle familiarity, touching their rough surfaces, studying their shapes, and imagining how each stone might rise into its new position. There was no urgency in their movements. The task ahead was understood as one that would unfold gradually, shaped by weather, daylight, and the natural rhythm of many hands working in harmony. The stones lay like sleeping giants, waiting patiently for the moment when the village would coax them upright. The builders began their careful preparations by shaping the ground around the future positions of the stones. Earth was piled into mounds beside deep, narrow pits, their edges smoothed by wooden tools and steady hands. The chalky soil lifted easily, forming soft white ridges that contrasted with the darker grass of the plain. People arranged long timbers nearby, testing their strength and balance and placing them in tidy rows so they could be reached quickly when the lifting began. Ropes were checked for wear, fibers twisted tighter where needed, and knots secured with calm precision. Every action carried a sense of quiet confidence, the villagers moving with the measured grace of those who knew patience better than speed. When the time came to raise the first stone, the community gathered together, forming a wide, peaceful circle around the massive block. The air held a gentle stillness, as though the plain itself were listening. Builders tied ropes around the upper portion of the stone, ensuring each loop lay smooth and secure against the rock's weathered surface. Others positioned long wooden levers beneath its base, testing their weight against the stone's slow willingness to shift. There were soft words exchanged, simple instructions, thoughtful reminders, small bits of encouragement that drifted through the air like warm breezes. Everyone understood their role, not through orders, but through the long memory of shared labor. With a slow, steady rhythm, the lifting began. The levers pressed downward, easing the stone's lower edge into the pit prepared for it. Ropes tightened as people leaned their weight into them, their feet planted firmly in the soil. The stone responded with gradual, deliberate movement, tilting upward in small increments. No one strained beyond comfort. Each effort was matched to the breath of the group, rising and falling with a natural cadence. When the stone paused, they paused. When it leaned forward slightly, they adjusted their ropes, with soft, coordinated motions. It was a dance without music, guided only by the deep understanding between people and the land they worked upon. As the stone reached its tipping point, a quiet murmur rippled through the crowd, not excitement, but a soft acknowledgement of progress shared among them. The stone slid gently into its pit, settling with a low, resonant sound that seemed to belong to the earth rather than disrupt it. People stepped back to observe, their faces relaxed, their breaths even. The stone stood at an angle, not yet upright but clearly on its way. Soil was pushed into the pit around its base, packed carefully with wooden poles and smooth stones. The builders worked with the same calm steadiness they had shown throughout the process, moving around the stone as though tending to a familiar companion. Finally, with a series of small, patient adjustments, the stone rose into its full height. It stood tall against the sky, casting a long, serene shadow across the grass. No one shouted, no one clapped. Instead, the villagers shared soft smiles, nods of satisfaction, and quiet glances of understanding. The achievement belonged to everyone equally, woven from many hands and many breaths. People touched the newly raised stone with gentle fingertips, feeling the cool surface warm slightly beneath the sun. Children gazed upward in wordless awe, their eyes tracing the towering shape that now anchored the plain more firmly than before. Another stone was prepared, then another. Each followed its own slow journey from the ground into the sky, rising through a balance of strength, coordination, and unhurried cooperation. The plain filled with the soft sounds of labor, the creak of wooden levers, the low murmur of voices, the steady crunch of footsteps moving across chalk and soil. The people worked in cycles, lifting, resting, adjusting, and lifting again. Breaks were frequent, taken without guilt or hesitation, as though they understood instinctively that endurance required gentleness as much as effort. Above the upright stones, lintels were eventually prepared, shaped carefully to fit across their tops. These massive horizontal blocks were placed with the same care as the standing stones, lifted slowly by ropes, guided by levers, and steadied by many supportive hands. When a lintel finally rested atop two upright stones, forming a simple, graceful arch, it caught the sunlight in a way that softened its massive weight. The plain seemed brighter for a moment as the arch framed a small portion of sky like a window into calmness. Those who stood nearby paused to watch the light shift across its surface, letting the moment settle gently in their memory. As more arches were completed, the emerging circle began to resemble a quiet wall of stone, not enclosing but embracing the space it formed. The lintels created a continuous line that echoed the curves of the land, while the standing stones offered shade and shelter in their tall, steady presence. People moved among them with growing familiarity, stepping through the spaces between stones as if walking through the slow unfolding of time itself. Each stone became part of the daily view, visible from homes, from fields, from the gentle paths leading to water and grazing. The circle, with its rising walls of stone, blended into life so seamlessly that it felt as though it had always belonged to the plain. Through every step of the process, the village held onto its quiet cheerfulness. They celebrated not with noise but with shared meals, soft laughter, and the contented fatigue that accompanied days spent working together. Children played near the stones, their footsteps light and quick around the towering shapes. Elders rested in the shade, watching with peaceful pride as the younger generations carried forward the ancient work of shaping the land. And always the walls of stone continued to rise, slowly, steadily, gently, guided by hands that understood the deep patience required to turn vision into form. Bluestones and the turning seasons. When the smaller bluestones finally reached the plain, their presence added a new softness to the growing monument. They had traveled far across landscapes shaped by rivers that wound slowly through distant valleys, forests that whispered with calm winds, and hills where the air felt cool, even under bright sunlight. The people who guided them across this long journey treated the stones with gentle patience, learning the weight of each one, adjusting ropes and wooden sledges, and pausing whenever the land suggested a moment of rest. By the time the Bluestones reached the circle, they seemed to carry the memory of every place they had passed, settling into the plain with a quiet familiarity that made them feel instantly at home among the larger Sarsen stones already standing watch. As the villagers prepared the ground for the placement of each bluestone, the landscape around them moved with its usual unhurried rhythm. Grass rippled in long stripes of green and gold, bending beneath the breeze like soft waves on a distant shore. Birds circled lazily overhead, gliding with wings held still, as though the air itself carried them. People walked in wide arcs around the monument, marking the positions where the stones would stand, their footsteps leaving pale impressions on the chalky soil. The earth yielded easily beneath their hands as they dug, shaping shallow pits that would cradle the bluestones with steady support. Every movement felt measured, deliberate, and woven deeply into the life of the plain. Once the stones were ready to be lifted, the village gathered the same way they had for the Sarsens, though the work here felt gentler, quieter, shaped by the smaller size and softer texture of the bluestones. Ropes were looped carefully around their surfaces, and wooden poles were positioned to act as guiding levers. People leaned their weight into the ropes, lifting in slow breaths, adjusting their stance whenever the stone shifted slightly. The bluestones responded with a patient willingness, rising inch by inch in a kind of calm cooperation between the builders and the land. There were no sudden movements, no tension in the air, only the steady, familiar rhythm of many hands working together in peaceful unity. As each bluestone found its place within the greater circle, the monument began to take on a layered presence, like a melody gaining harmony one quiet note at a time. The large Sarsens formed the towering outer ring, firm and imposing in their stillness, while the bluestones stood tucked within, smaller but deeply expressive in the gentle shapes they created. Some were arranged in arcs, others in clusters, and a few in straight, thoughtful lines that seemed to guide the eye across the landscape. When sunlight touched their surfaces, the stones revealed subtle hues, muted blues, soft grays, and faint purples that blended beautifully with the shifting colors of sky and grass around them. The seasons continued their slow turning as the bluestones settled deeper into their roles. Winter arrived with a pale hush that softened every edge of the plain. Frost gathered in delicate patterns along the grass, sparkling faintly under the weak morning sunlight. The stones stood wrapped in cold air, their surfaces cooling into gentle shades that blended almost seamlessly with the winter landscape. Villagers moved more slowly at this time of year, their breath forming soft clouds that drifted upward as they tended fires, repaired shelters, or checked on animals resting near the warmth of their homes. The monument watched these winter rhythms in silence, its presence steady and reassuring beneath the quiet sky. When spring returned, the air grew warmer and new shoots broke through the soil, bringing a fresh brightness to the plain. Birds took to the sky in lively flocks, their calls echoing across the open fields. The Bluestones seemed to absorb the renewed energy of the season, their surfaces catching the early morning light in a way that softened their shapes, making them appear almost alive with gentle color. People passed between them with light footsteps, carrying baskets filled with fresh herbs, weaving tools, or small offerings of woven grasses meant simply to acknowledge the turning of another year. The monument became a place where the rhythm of the seasons could be felt in every shift of wind and every change in the sky. Summer stretched long and bright across the land. Days warmed the soil beneath bare feet, and evenings glowed with the soft gold of lingering sunlight. Children played among the stones, weaving in gentle circles, their laughter fluttering through the air like birdsong. Adults rested in the shade cast by the taller Sarsens, enjoying the coolness created by the stone walls. The Bluestones, warmed by sunlight throughout the day, radiated a gentle heat in the fading light of evening. They stood like calm companions to the season, holding the warmth of the day, even after the sky darkened and the stars began their slow rise overhead. Autumn arrived in quiet shifts, darker evenings, cooler winds, and grasses fading into mellow browns and golds. The Bluestones seemed to merge with the season's palette, their natural colors deepening under the muted sky. Leaves drifted across the plain in loose spirals, gathering gently at the base of the stones. People moved through their daily tasks with steady calm, storing grain, preparing shelters, and collecting firewood. The monument remained a constant center point in the landscape, a place where villagers paused during their work to breathe, observe the sky, and feel the gentle steadiness of the world around them. The turning seasons passed like pages in a slow-moving story, each adding its own tone to the monument's quiet presence. As the years unfolded, Stonehenge became not just a structure, but a place where time itself could be felt in the sky. The rising and setting of the sun aligned with certain stones, casting long shadows in patterns that changed with the months. In winter, light spilled through narrow gaps, illuminating pathways that had been shaped long before memory. In summer, the sun climbed high, bathing the monument in warm brilliance that softened every stone's outline. People learned to read these patterns with gentle understanding, sensing the movement of days through the shifting light, using the monument as a quiet companion rather than a tool. The sky and stones worked together in silent partnership, marking the cycles that guided life on the plain. By the time the Bluestones had fully joined the circle, the monument had grown into a peaceful meeting between land, stone, and sky. Nothing about it felt grand or urgent. It was a place built slowly, shaped by patience, and gently woven into the turning of seasons. Each stone carried the memory of its long journey, each shadow told of passing days, and each shift of sunlight across its surface revealed the steady heartbeat of time. Stonehenge, stone by stone, became a place where the seasons spoke softly, where the sky shared its ancient rhythm, and where the land held everything in a calm, unbroken embrace. The wide landscape of circles. Across the great stretches of Salisbury Plain, the land carried more than a single monument. Stonehenge, though striking in its presence, was only one gentle note in a broader landscape shaped slowly by generations. Other forms appeared across the fields, long, narrow earthworks carved patiently into the soil, known today as cursus monuments. Their long outlines stretched in quiet lines across the plain, rising slightly from the grass like soft signatures left by hands that understood the land deeply. Round burial mounds dotted the horizon as well, their shapes smooth and calm, blending into the natural curves of the earth. And farther away stood the vast rings of Avebury, with its embanked circles embracing the land in wide, gentle arcs. Each of these places held its own quiet story, though all were connected by a shared understanding of time, sky, and the slow movements of people through the landscape. Paths wound between these ancient structures, forming soft threads drawn lightly across the land. They were not carved sharply into the soil, but instead shaped by countless footsteps pressing gently over the same ground season after season. Children walked them on errands, shepherds followed them with their flocks, and travelers used them as familiar guides when crossing the open plain. As the paths connected monument to monument, they created a sense of gentle continuity, as though each site belonged to a larger, unhurried rhythm. Standing on any one of these paths, a person could feel the openness of the land, folding calmly around them, offering a sense of direction without demanding any particular haste. People moved through this landscape with a pace as steady as the turning seasons. They walked slowly through fields where tall grasses brushed softly against their clothing, their footsteps creating faint impressions on the damp earth in the early morning. Along ridges, they followed elevated views that allowed them to see the shapes of circles and mounds arranged in deliberate patterns across the horizon. These high places offered a peaceful vantage point where the land unfolded in generous sweeps, revealing the quiet harmony of the monuments scattered across the plain. And when they crossed gentle slopes, the ground rose and fell beneath their feet, like the breath of the earth itself, guiding them onward with effortless ease. Traveling between these places felt like moving through chapters of the same story. Each circle carried its own character. Stonehenge with its towering stones angled toward the sky, the cursus with its long, thoughtful lines stretching across the land, the burial mounds with their soft, rounded silhouettes, and Avebury with its wide embrace, holding the plain in a gentle ring. Yet none of these chapters contradicted the others. Instead, they unfolded with quiet consistency, as though written by many hands over many seasons, each adding a layer of calm understanding to the landscape. People did not speak of these places with reverence or urgency. They simply accepted them as part of the world they knew, trusting their steady presence across changing generations. The land itself felt spacious and open, holding all these structures as though in steady arms. Wind moved easily across the plain, brushing the grass in smooth waves and carrying the faint scents of soil, herbs, and distant fires. Birds circled above the monuments, gliding effortlessly on shifting currents of air. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky, casting broad shadows that rolled gently over burial mounds and earthworks alike. Nothing about the landscape felt confined. Instead, it offered a sense of endless breadth, its wide stretches giving people room to walk, pause, and think without interruption. On summer days, the paths between circles warmed beneath the sun, and people traveled them with light steps, pausing to rest beneath patches of shade cast by the stones or by scattered clusters of trees. Their conversations flowed softly, carried off by the breeze before settling anywhere permanent. Children ran ahead, tracing the outlines of earthworks with playful movements, their laughter blending with the rustle of grass. Even the animals seemed to recognize the calm patterns of the land, grazing freely near the monuments without disturbing their quiet presence. During cooler seasons, the movement across the plain took on a gentler, more deliberate rhythm. Frost painted pale edges on the mounds, and the low winter sun cast long shadows across the ridges. People wrapped themselves in thick furs and walked with slower steps, their breath rising in small clouds as they followed the familiar paths from circle to circle. The plain, though colder, remained welcoming in its openness, the wide stretches of grass and sky offering a sense of peaceful continuity, even during the quietest winter mornings. Throughout all these seasons, the landscape of circles remained a place where time felt less like a straight line and more like a gentle turning wheel. The monuments watched the rise and fall of daylight, the shifting colors of the sky, and the steady movement of people across the land. Each circle, mound, and earthwork held its place with calm assurance, standing not as markers of power, but as quiet companions to the daily life unfolding around them. Generations lived and moved among these shapes without needing to define their significance. The land itself offered meaning through its presence. As people walked between the monuments, they often moved without destination, letting their paths curve naturally toward whichever circle appeared next along the horizon. These journeys carried no urgency. Instead, they served as quiet moments for breathing, thinking, and feeling the steady pulse of the land beneath their feet. The openness of the plain allowed thoughts to stretch and settle as gently as the grass swaying in the wind. In these moments of wandering, people felt themselves part of the landscape's broader story, connected by the paths and circles that guided them through time in slow, thoughtful steps. In the end, the wide landscape of circles became not just a collection of ancient forms, but a living tapestry woven through generations. Every ridge, path, mound, and monument contributed to a shared understanding of place, a calm agreement between people and land. The plain gathered these shapes into its expansive embrace, holding them gently as the seasons continued their eternal turning. And as villagers moved through this spacious world of earth and stone, they did so with the quiet recognition that they walked through the unfolding story of their ancestors, carried forward on soft steps, guided by the circles that shaped their days. The gentle processions of the solstices. During certain times of the year when the seasons shifted with slow certainty and the air held a softness carried from distant horizons, groups of people would begin their quiet journey toward Stonehenge. These gatherings did not start with announcements or urgency. They simply unfolded from the natural rhythm of life on the plain. families stepped from their dwellings with calm purpose, carrying woven baskets, warm cloaks, and gentle anticipation. Their footsteps moved in slow, peaceful lines, following the ancient avenues traced across the land long before any of them were born. These paths stretched smoothly through grass and low ridges, curving toward the distant stones with such familiarity that even children walked them without hesitation, as though guided by memory older than themselves. As the long processions drifted forward, the sky often brightened in gradual tender colors. In summer, pale gold spread across the horizon like a thin brush stroke laid gently over the edge of the world, warming the grass and giving the distant stones a soft glow. In winter, the light shifted toward silvery blue, cool and quiet, casting delicate reflections along frost-touched ground. People noticed these colors without rushing to interpret them. They simply accepted them as part of the unfolding day. The air felt open and wide, allowing conversations to drift lightly before dissolving into the breeze. Even the sound of footsteps blended into a gentle murmur, a calm rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the landscape itself. As they approached Stonehenge, the stones began to emerge more clearly, rising from the plain with their familiar patience. Some appeared as shadowed silhouettes, others brightened by early light, and all of them stood with the same quiet dignity they had held through countless turning seasons. The people walking toward them felt no need for ceremony. They simply aligned their pace with the stillness of the land. Children slowed their steps, sensing the gentle weight of the moment, while elders lifted their eyes to trace the shapes of the stones against the sky. The monument did not command attention, yet it invited awareness in a soft, understated way that made every movement feel connected to something much larger than any single day. When the sun finally began to rise or set along the horizon, it often moved with an elegance that felt almost intentional, though it belonged solely to the natural order of the sky. The light slipped between the stones with effortless grace, forming long beams that stretched across the ground or settled onto the faces of the Bluestones and Sarsens. In summer, the rising sun entered the monument like a gentle companion, warm and steady, illuminating the spaces between stones with a quiet certainty. In winter, the setting sun drifted lower with a silvery softness, its light weaving lightly around the monument before sinking into the horizon. People stood in calm lines, watching with unhurried eyes as the sky performed its slow and predictable turning. There was no rush, no surge, no loud celebration. Instead, the gatherings carried a peaceful alignment of earth, sky, and stone. People breathed in the cool or warm air, felt the ground beneath their feet, and watched the light unfold in its ancient rhythm. The monument did not transform the moment into anything dramatic. It merely provided a frame through which the sun could be seen in a calm, meaningful way. People understood this without explanation. They knew that standing before the stones during the solstice was simply a way to notice the world turning, to acknowledge the slow and gentle passage of time, and to feel themselves part of a landscape much older and steadier than their own brief lives. After the sun reached its position, rising fully into the sky or dipping quietly beyond the horizon, people lingered for a while among the stones. They walked slowly between the tall Sarsens, touching their cool surfaces, feeling the texture of ancient stone shaped by wind and seasons. Some sat on grassy edges, sharing soft conversation or enjoying quiet moments of rest. Children traced the shadows cast by the stones, watching them shift gradually as the light changed. Elders observed the monument with thoughtful eyes, noting how each solstice felt familiar, yet always slightly different, shaped by changing clouds, shifting winds, and the unique pattern of each passing year. As the gatherings continued, small clusters of people formed gently within the monument. They spoke about the turning seasons, the growth of crops, the shifting of herds, and the small events that shaped village life. Their voices remained low, blending easily with the soft sounds of wind passing between the stones. Occasionally, someone would point to the sky, drawing attention to a subtle change in color or the quiet movement of a bird gliding overhead. Nothing felt rushed. The conversations drifted in and out, much like the slow movement of light across the plain. These moments held a simple companionship, grounded in the shared experience of standing together beneath the wide sky. Once people felt ready to leave, they began to walk away from the monument with the same slow steadiness that had guided them there. The paths remained smooth beneath their feet, leading them through fields brushed by wind and across slopes warmed by the day's light. Children wandered slightly ahead or behind, picking small flowers or examining stones in the grass. Adults walked with easy strides, sometimes glancing back at Stonehenge, its silhouette now softened by distance. The monument remained in view for a long time, standing quietly as it had always done, watching over the plain with patient calm. The gatherings dispersed naturally, spreading out across the land like gentle ripples returning to stillness. As evening or morning settled fully around the plain, Stonehenge returned to its steady silence. The last beams of sunlight rested briefly on the tops of the stones before fading away, leaving them wrapped in shadow or dim glow. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of earth and grass. Birds settled onto distant trees or lifted into the sky for slow, graceful flights. The monument watched these changes without movement, holding its place within the landscape as it had for countless generations. The solstice had passed, marked not by declaration but by the quiet alignment of light, land, and stone. And so the gentle processions continued year after year, shaping a memory that lingered softly in the minds of those who walked the paths. The solstices became part of a rhythm that matched the seasons themselves, unfolding in a cycle that felt both ancient and familiar. People returned to their homes with calm hearts, carrying the slow beauty of the moment with them. Stonehenge remained behind, standing quietly under the widening sky, a patient companion to the sun's turning and the endless peaceful movement of time. Stonehenge through later ages. Centuries drifted gently across the plain, folding themselves into soft layers of time, and Stonehenge remained in its place with the same patient stillness it had shown since the first stones were raised. The people who had shaped the monument were long gone, their footsteps fading from the earth. Yet the stones continued to watch over the land with their quiet, dependable presence. New communities appeared, built homes, tended fields, and lived their ordinary days beneath the widening sky. As they moved through the changing landscape, they accepted the great stones as part of the world they inherited, unchanged, steady, and woven naturally into the rhythm of their lives. Visitors came and went, some pausing to observe, others passing by with only brief glances, but all recognizing that the stones belonged to the plain in a way that required no explanation. Roman travelers eventually crossed the region, their roads stretching in long, straight lines through the countryside. Some paused to sketch the stones, recording their shapes with simple marks and journals that would travel far beyond the borders of the plain. To these travelers, the monument appeared ancient and mysterious, yet they approached it with a calm curiosity rather than excitement. They walked among the stones, touching their weathered surfaces, noting their angles and heights, and sometimes resting in their shade during warm afternoons. The stones themselves remained unmoved by this new attention, keeping their long silence as the centuries continued their gentle turning. After the Roman era settled into memory, the Middle Ages unfolded in equally quiet rhythms. Shepherds guided their flocks across the wide fields surrounding Stonehenge, letting sheep wander through the tall grasses that brushed softly against their legs. During cool afternoons or moments of light rain, shepherds sometimes used the stones as comfortable windbreaks, leaning against their solid forms while watching over the flock. The monument offered shelter without intention, holding the wind at bay in the same peaceful manner that it held its place in the landscape. Sheep grazed between the stones as though moving between tall, ancient trees, their soft bleats drifting into the air and blending with the sound of the breeze. Grass grew high in summer, forming gentle waves that rolled across the plain with every shift of wind. The stones rose above this movement like slow islands in a flowing sea of green, catching sunlight on their broad faces and casting long shadows that shifted gradually throughout the day. Children from nearby settlements sometimes played in the grass near the monument, weaving simple games around the stones, running along the shadows, and resting in patches of cool earth. To them, Stonehenge was not a monument of awe or grandeur. It was simply a steady companion in the landscape, a familiar presence they had known since the earliest days of childhood. Their laughter carried lightly between the stones, adding brightness to the quiet space. Winter brought another kind of stillness to the plain. Snow drifted across the ground in slow, delicate patterns, covering the earth in white that softened every ridge and hollow. The stones stood against the pale sky, their surfaces dusted with frost, their outlines muted but unmistakable. Shepherds wrapped in thick wool walked past the monument with their flocks, guiding the animals toward sheltered areas where grass or stored feed could be found. Footsteps made soft impressions in the snow, forming temporary paths that disappeared with the next storm. Stonehenge absorbed these winters with calm endurance, never shifting, never resisting, simply settling into each season with the same quiet acceptance that had carried it through countless years. As new generations grew and old ones faded, the monument continued to shape the identity of the plain without effort. People understood it as something ancient, though they no longer remembered who built it or for what purpose. Stories drifted through communities. Gentle tales passed between families around evening fires. Some believed the stones had once walked across the plain. Others imagined they had appeared in a single night of quiet transformation. Yet even these stories were told without urgency or insistence. They were part of the restful imagination of the people, adding color to winter evenings and quiet summer nights, offering companionship rather than explanation. The stones listened to all such tales without response, holding their own silence as firmly as ever. In later centuries, Travelers from distant places came to observe Stonehenge, drawn by stories carried across regions and seas. They approached the monument with thoughtful steps, often pausing before entering the circle as though acknowledging the long history embedded in the ground. Some made sketches, others wrote notes, and some simply stood in place, observing the shapes and shadows. Yet even as interest grew slowly over time, Stonehenge remained unchanged in its calm presence. The land around it continued to breathe in gentle cycles of sunlight, wind, and rain, embracing the monument as naturally as it embraced the hills, rivers, and grass. The surrounding fields evolved subtly with human use. Paths deepened with travel, new settlements rose and fell, and crops shifted with the needs of each generation. But through it all, the stones persisted in their steady watch. They marked no hours, demanded no attention, and offered no warnings. Instead, they provided a sense of quiet continuity, reminding people that the land held memories far older than any single lifetime. When storms moved across the plain, lightning sometimes illuminated the stones for brief, brilliant moments. But once the thunder faded, everything returned to peaceful stillness. By the time early scholars and curious wanderers began to describe Stonehenge in written accounts, the monument had already lived through many ages of slow, gentle change. These writers observed it with fascination, tracing the fallen stones, sketching their arrangement, and pondering their meaning. Although their notes introduced Stonehenge to broader audiences, the monument itself remained indifferent to this new attention. It continued to stand through bright mornings and quiet evenings, through long summers and brief winters, through centuries when people came and went, their lives folding seamlessly into the landscape's enduring calm. And always beneath sun, rain, and snow, the stones kept their silence. Time drifted around them like soft mist, flowing across the plain, never disturbing their steady presence. Whether surrounded by sheep, visited by travelers, or seen only by birds passing overhead, Stonehenge held its ground as a gentle companion to the ever-changing world, unchanging, dependable, and present through every season that brushed lightly against the wide, ancient land. Scholars, explorers, and quiet discoveries. Long after the early builders had vanished into the quiet distance of time, Stonehenge remained standing on the plain with its deep stillness, waiting through centuries for new eyes to study its form. When scholars finally arrived, they approached the stones with slow steps and thoughtful minds, carrying notebooks, charcoal sticks, and a sense of calm curiosity. They did not hurry toward conclusions or impose loud interpretations upon the monument. Instead, they sketched the stones in careful lines, tracing every curve, shadow, and weathered edge. Their drawings captured the monument not as something monumental or dramatic, but as a series of gentle shapes, resting peacefully within the open landscape. These early scholars often sat for long stretches of time, observing how the light shifted across each surface, how the horizon met the stones in soft angles, and how silence seemed to wrap itself around the circle like a calm companion. As the years continued, antiquarians visited the plain with a combination of curiosity and quiet admiration. They walked slowly around the monument, pacing the ground with notebooks held firmly in their hands. Their notes were filled with careful measurements, steady observations, and small reflections that emerged from the solitude of the open fields. These antiquarians seldom rushed during their work. Instead, they allowed the land to set the pace, They noted the patterns of fallen stones, the gentle rise of the earthworks beyond the circle, and the subtle traces of human activity lingering beneath the grasses. Their footsteps were soft, leaving temporary impressions in the soil that vanished with the next rainfall, while the stones remained unmoved, holding their long patience across all seasons and shifting winds. Later still, modern archaeologists arrived with new tools, though their approach held the same gentleness as the observers who had come before them. They knelt beside the stones with brushes and small trowels, working calmly as they brushed away thin layers of soil. Each stroke revealed something that had been waiting beneath the surface: shards of pottery, charred remains of ancient fires, or faint outlines of pits long buried beneath the earth. These discoveries did not surprise the archaeologists in loud or dramatic ways. Instead, each find felt like a soft unveiling of time, a delicate uncovering of stories long forgotten. They mapped the ground with patient precision, marking points on their charts with steady hands, and moving slowly across the landscape as though they feared disturbing the quiet breath of the plain. As archaeologists widened their study, they discovered ancient avenues stretching outward from the stone circle. These pathways, once used by early communities, connected Stonehenge to other features of the landscape. Some led toward the river, where people had walked at unhurried paces, carrying stone, timber, or simple offerings. Others curved gently toward distant ridges. The paths revealed themselves like faint memories: subtle depressions in the grass, small variations in soil color, or patterns noticed only from elevated viewpoints. The more archaeologists uncovered, the more they realized how wide the ancient network truly was, extending far beyond the monument itself and shaping the plain into a connected tapestry of movement, ceremony, and everyday life. One of the most remarkable discoveries emerged beneath the soil at a site not far from Stonehenge, Durrington Walls, a vast circular enclosure hidden quietly under the earth. When researchers brushed away the layers above it, they found traces of large timber structures, paths worn smooth by countless ancient footsteps, and deep pits arranged in thoughtful arcs around the perimeter. The ring at Durrington Walls revealed the presence of a vibrant community that had once lived, cooked, worked, and gathered within that broad circle. Yet even this discovery carried a softness. It was not revealed in a sudden rush, but in a slow unfolding of soil turned gently by hand, each small detail emerging like a memory rising from sleep. Every new finding offered archaeologists another layer of time, soft and delicate, waiting quietly beneath the plain. They uncovered animal bones, bits of flint, fragments of tools, and the faint outlines of ancient post holes that suggested earlier structures, long removed by weather and shifting soil. These remnants whispered of the daily rhythms of people who had lived thousands of years before. The archaeologists listened not with their ears, but with patient attention, piecing together small clues as though assembling a puzzle whose edges were made of mist. They learned that Stonehenge was not merely a circle of stones standing alone. It was part of a wider, gentler landscape, shaped by generations of lives, seasons, and footsteps. The land offered its secrets in a soft and unhurried way. Archaeologists often remarked on how the plain seemed to reveal information only when approached with respect and calmness. Heavy machinery was almost never needed. Most discoveries emerged beneath light touches of a brush or the steady clearing of soil by hand. The earth gave its history freely, but only to those who matched its pace. Working at Stonehenge became as much an exercise in patience as in knowledge. Researchers spent hours watching the changing shadows across the monument, noting how the stones aligned with the turning sun, or how the landscape shaped the movement of wind and light. Understanding came not through force, but through quiet observation and gentle persistence. As scholars and archaeologists formed clearer pictures of the past, they shared their findings with the wider world. Yet even as the monument gained attention from distant places, Stonehenge remained unchanged, breathing calmly within its familiar plane. The discoveries did not add weight to the stones or transform the land. Instead, they added depth to the stories, gently woven into the soil. People came to understand that the monument's meaning was not locked in a single answer, but lived in the layers of time, the connections of landscape, and the slow, deliberate work of hands that built it long ago. Stonehenge continued to hold its silence, allowing each visitor to feel, observe, and imagine without imposing conclusions. Through all this attention, centuries of drawings, notes, excavations, and cautious hypotheses, the monument itself remained both generous and reserved. It offered glimpses of its history through faint markings, buried structures, and soft impressions in the soil. Yet it kept much of its story unspoken, as though choosing to share only what could be understood through patience rather than certainty. This gentle withholding did not frustrate those who studied it. Instead, it encouraged them to return again and again, to listen more closely to the land's quiet voice, and to appreciate the steady, enduring presence of the stones. In the end, the discoveries surrounding Stonehenge were not loud revelations, but quiet understandings that settled slowly into the minds of those who studied the monument. Each uncovered detail added depth, texture, and warmth to the story of the plain. The landscape offered its secrets gently, as if lifting them from a quiet dream, allowing scholars to glimpse the layers of time that had shaped the monument and the people who once walked among the stones. And through every season, through every new discovery, Stonehenge remained what it had always been, a calm companion to the land, patiently watching over the slow unfolding of time. The slow clock of stone. Now the night returns across Salisbury Plain, settling once more into a soft blue darkness that stretches gently from horizon to horizon. You lie again in the grass where the earth feels cool beneath your hands, and the familiar shapes of the stones rise quietly above you, their outlines softened by the dimming sky. The air carries the same calm stillness that has wrapped this landscape for thousands of years, moving lightly through the open fields, as though careful not to disturb the long memory of the land. Around you, the plain exhales slowly, and the ancient monument seems to lean slightly toward the deepening night, as if acknowledging your presence with its silent, steady composure. Nothing rushes, nothing presses forward. The world draws its breath in a long, gentle rhythm, preparing for the soft unfolding of dawn. In the east, the first hint of midsummer light reaches the edge of the world, brushing the horizon with a pale brightness that grows one delicate shade at a time. This early glow moves with the slow confidence of a sun that has risen through 5,000 years of mornings, its warmth gathering quietly before it lifts into the sky. The stones catch the faint light in smooth gradients, their surfaces glowing softly as though awakening from their own deep rest. Shadows ease themselves into new angles across the grass, stretching lightly toward your feet. The plain begins to shift in color, trading deep blues for muted golds that drift gradually into view. Still, the moment remains unhurried, a calm transition from night to day that honors the ancient rhythm guiding the land. As the light grows, the world softens around you. Sounds seem gentler, as though muffled by the early hour. Your breath finds its own quiet pattern, matching the slow movement of the wind crossing the plain. You feel the weight of the day has not yet risen, leaving only ease and spaciousness in the air. The stones above you stand with their familiar firmness, yet they hold no heaviness, only presence, only patience. Their long shadows, their weathered surfaces, their silent watchfulness create a sense of calm that settles softly into your chest. The horizon expands, the sky opens. The plain feels wide enough to carry every gentle thought. Here, in this early light, everything seems to move at the pace of breath and stone. And so the ancient circle stands as the slowest clock in the world, steady, patient, endlessly calm, marking time not through numbers or urgency, but through sunrises, seasons, and shadows that have crossed this land for millennia. It offers no instruction, no demand, only a quiet companionship that guides you gently toward rest. As the first warmth of the midsummer sun touches the grass around you, your body softens into the earth, your breath deepens, and your thoughts drift into quietness. The stones remain above you, silent and sure, holding space for your stillness as the world eases itself into day. And in this soft convergence of light, stone, and breath, you feel yourself slipping into the deep, unbroken drift of sleep, carried onward by the calm endurance of the plain.